Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for being here today. We're here today to talk about two things that are very deeply concerning to this board and to the City of Toledo. The first is an issue we've had much too familiarity with, and that is harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie. We hope we haven't come to the point in our history we just accept them for what they are, because they are not, and they are avoidable, and they are unnecessary, and they are harmful to our city and our county and our economy here. Yet they continue to exist. Why do they continue to exist? Because there's been a failure to act on many levels of government, and that failure to act is not at this level of government. Why do people take petition against the government? They do it when they fail to act, and it's particularly interesting when one government has to petition a different form of government to act in what should be all our common interests here today. Moments ago, there was a lawsuit filed against the U.S. EPA, the federal regulatory agency charged with protecting our waterways. This is not the first time that we've had to sue the U.S. EPA. In 2019, we embarked on this course again. We're steadfast, and with great legal counsel like Mr. Byers and ELPC from Chicago, we kind of won. They said they would enter in a consent decree, given the severity of our case, and work with the state EPA to create a document to measure pollution in the Maumee River and the watershed of Lake Erie. That was the next step, to enter an agreement with the state to monitor and enforce the Clean Water Act. We are here today to say they have failed in that. The state has failed in that. The U.S. government has failed in that. And again, it's the City of Toledo and the Board of County Commissioners that have to rise back up and tell them that they have failed. How have they failed? They will say, we've got the H2O Ohio program, a voluntary program amongst farmers that's very nice and benign, and some farmers are very cooperative. It's not moving the needle on what it's supposed to do, and that's clean up our river and our lake. It is not. And one reason it's not is since that time there has been an abundance of concentrated animal feeding operations. They're called CAFOs. Some people call them farms. These things are no more farms than the vegetable garden next to my house on River Road. Drive out and look. These are factories that produce food that we all like to eat, but just like any other factory, they produce massive amounts of waste. And that massive amounts of waste is, the regulation of that is being hidden by the fact that they call themselves farms and they're part of agriculture. Go out there and find me a couple tomatoes on this farm, all right? You can't. The only things you can farm are large masses of things we don't like to smell or have in our water. It's a failure of the U.S. EPA, it's a failure of the state EPA to control the growth and the spread and the regulations of industrial meat production. Not a farm, it is industrial meat production at an industrial scale. That is what is degrading our lake further than anything the farmers have ever done. Yet they are unpermitted here. They are not regulated here by the state of Ohio. And when we've asked in our lawsuit and our consent decree to have them measured, the state has failed to do that. They gave us a document, a measurement document called a TMTL that fails on its very face to do any legitimate measuring of the waste produced by these industries into our rivers, lakes, and streams. We're not going to stand for it. We didn't in 2015 when we had the first incident. We didn't stand for it in 2019. And in 2024, we are going to be relentless. We have to be relentless. They have failed. We see all across the country now what happens when constituencies fail to be heard. All right? We have failed to be heard, but we're going to take a legal course to do it. So we have great counsel you'll hear from, but I will hand this over to my fellow commissioners. We've been steadfast. We're not going away. You've got to control these things called farms that are not farms. They're industrial waste output. If it was Jeep doing this stuff, if it was the City of Toledo, if it was our own waste plant, they would have us on charges, they would have us on orders, and they would fine us. How do they give a pass to an industry that's in bed with the Department of Agriculture, to an industry that's in bed with the state EPA? We're going to make that bed messied up with this lawsuit. And Commissioner Specky.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Gerken. I want to tell you a little story that sums up what we're dealing with right here. I was recently in Waterville with my fellow colleague, Commissioner Lopez, and we took a little tour of the Lucas County Water Resource Recovery Facility and really learned a lot about the inner workings and how everything is processed through there. And what those folks do on a daily basis is truly amazing. I'm going to give you a couple of facts here. They've taken about 16 to 17 billion gallons of water, cleaned it up, and then they put it back out into our waterways that end up into Lake Erie. So think about that, 16 to 17 million gallons of water, or we'll say poo a day, that they're cleaned up, that gets transferred through and all cleaned up and then out back into our waterways. During the tour, our facility manager, Jason Collins, talked about the regulations his operation has to go through. They're very strenuous regulations, and rightfully so. I'm okay with that. But what the contrast is how CAFOs, those concentrated animal feeding operation industry, is they don't have to have any kind of regulation, but we do when we're taking poo in and cleaning it up and making it its way through the process. So kind of think about that. How that's kind of a messed up thought process. One has to do it because you're a governmental agency. The other one doesn't, but they all are feeding into the same lake, and that's Lake Erie. And I was also thinking about this the other day, too, is we've had a really, really, really warm winter. Has our alga bloom even gone away? I think not. So what's going to happen is we have climate change is happening, and we're warming up here. I have tropical plants that I could put out in May 1st when I couldn't put tropical plants out when I first moved here 28 years ago because of the type of weather we were having then, but to where we are now. That alga bloom is not going away. And Pete is right. These massive livestock operations shouldn't be considered farms. I'll tell you another little story. June 30th, 1967, in Republic, Missouri. Look it up on your map. Southwest part of the state of Missouri. I was born. June 30th, 1967. Feel free to send me a birthday gift. When I was born on a farm. I was born on a farm, not at the farm, I was born in a hospital and taken home back to the farmland. And on that farm, yes, Commissioner Gerken, we grew tomatoes. And on that farm, we grew alfalfa. And on that farm, we grew straw. And on that farm, we had dairy cattle. And on that farm, we had chickens and a rooster that would chase us around. And we also had pigs, okay? But we didn't have tens of thousands of chickens that were massively producing, okay? And this is where our livelihood was. We milked the cows, the dairyman came, picked up the milk, took it out, it was sold out on the market. But we weren't contaminating on that small farm like they are on these industries that are interrupting our ability to have clean water. A study published in the summer of 2022 found that more than 60% of the animal feeding operations that impact the western Lake Erie Basin aren't required to have a permit. So, who is tracking, all these animal waste? I know where we are in the county. We're tracking what we do. We're regulated. But who is really tracking this animal waste? The answer we all know is no one. The EPA knows the animal waste that these industrial operations produce is directly responsible for polluting our water. But they're choosing to sit back and just let it happen. That's unacceptable. We're not going to choose to sit back as a county. The city's not going to choose to sit back, and the citizens aren't expecting us to sit back and do nothing. They're asking us to do something. We're filing this joint lawsuit because our waterways are one of our many resources Lucas County has that is so great. And people all around, outside of Lucas County, outside of the state of Ohio, look at our waterways. And they look at our lakes. And they want to come here and visit in the summertime. They want to be able to take their kids out on a boat. They want to be able to go fishing. There's an industry we have. Walleye are running. People really like that walleye. People really like that perch. But they don't want it from a nasty, toxic lake. You all remember the pandemic this community was sent into 10 years ago. Photos of our green water went viral, and not for the right reason. And in response, the EPA decided that the situation apparently wasn't scary enough. And it's been 10 years since our community was left without drinking water, and the main source of Lake Erie's pollution still hasn't been addressed. It's shameful, and our residents, our visitors, deserve better. Until we get reassurance that the EPA is going to take this issue seriously, we are going to fight for our waters no matter what it takes. There's too much at stake, and quite honestly, we have a responsibility. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Commissioner Lopez. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us today. Our natural resources are worth protecting in this community, and we take this issue seriously as your county and city leaders. We know what's poisoning our water, and yet the EPA has been negligent in its actions for remediation. This has forced us to take it upon ourselves to take action, and that's again why we're here today, united to make sure that Lake Erie and our river is protected. As Commissioner Sebecki said, 10 years ago, this algae bloom and the neglect and abuse of our water turned this community into a panic. I had visitors from Florida. My family was here visiting from Florida. And as county leaders were meeting, we were trying to find bottles of water to make sure that all our family had enough supply with my elderly parents. And the fact that we're still discussing this potential risk to us and our family and our community is embarrassing to the EPA. In 2019, we had another bloom, which was not a beautiful bloom. And again, my son and his school was hosting a crew competition downtown in the river, Maumee River, and guests from Ohio and Michigan, across the state of Ohio and Michigan, decided that they were not going to cancel the competition, but all the youth, our children, would be on their crew boats and then have to wash their bodies and be cleansed immediately. And that is where we still stand today, that we are not thinking about the future of our community, our youth, and already the damage and embarrassment that has occurred. So I stand here united. I am so happy that we have excellent legal counsel, Fritz Byers, representing us, filing this complaint, and we can file amicus briefs and lawsuits until the cows come home, no pun intended, but we're really asking for the EPA to fully do its duty, to do the job and protect our waters. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Well, on behalf of the City of Toledo, I would like to begin by saying we are happy to join this lawsuit. We're proud to join this lawsuit, but we're sad that we had to join this lawsuit. We're sad that there is a lawsuit. We would have thought that our EPA, charged with protecting our air and waterways and ultimately our citizens, would have taken its job more seriously. But it hasn't, and so we are going to attempt to petition our government for redress of grievances. And that's what this lawsuit is all about, and one that the City of Toledo enthusiastically joins. There's been a lot of talk this morning already, maybe even this afternoon. I believe the talk has been this afternoon about the water crisis. You're going to be hearing a lot more about that as we get toward August, because August is the 10-year anniversary of the water crisis. I want to point out a few things. We no longer have a drinking water problem in Toledo, even while we still have a lake water problem. Well, how can that be? Well, it's because, unfortunately, the residents of our region have had to reach into their pockets for almost $700 million since the water crisis to make the improvements at the plant necessary to allow water coming from a poisonous source to be drinkable. And actually, since the water crisis, the quality of our drinking water has actually won awards. We've actually won awards for the quality of what comes out of that faucet. So no one has to worry about the water that we're drinking anymore. But what a shame it is that the taxpayers of Northwest Ohio had to essentially tax themselves $700 million to install the ozonation system and all the other gadgets and gizmos at that plant to allow us to have the most basic commodity of, that supports life, water. It would have been more just had the state or federal EPA done its job and provided some sort of meaningful action to assist in this regard, when in fact they have not. And what hasn't been mentioned yet this afternoon, and it's actually largely gone unreported, I'd encourage this as we get toward August to maybe add this to some of the reporting. The level of phosphorus, in other words, the level of toxicity, of poison in our lake is no lower than it was in August of 2014. There's been no improvement. Zero. None. I remember the governor coming up, all the news conferences and hullabaloo. We're going to have a 40% reduction. I think it was within 5 years and maybe in 10 years. But, well, okay, it's been 10 years. There's been a 0% reduction. Nothing. None. Yet, in order to survive, we are the ones who have had to tax ourselves, $750 million to make the improvements necessary to drink the water. It's not fair. And you might wonder, well, how could this happen? It can happen in an environment where our leaders, especially at the state level, care more about campaign donations than they do about citizens. It won't shock you that our state legislature is more focused on campaign dollars than the citizens they serve. That's the lesson more than anything else of the First Energy scandal in a lot of ways. But that story is told again and again and again on other issues. This one too. Because at the end of the day, it is the financial muscle of the CAFO industry, of big, not family farms of the sort we've heard about, but the big mega corporations running these concentrated feeding operations. Their donations, I'll just say it, it just matters, they matter more to the politicians in Columbus than the human beings who live here. It's the only way to explain it. And that is how they've been able to dodge and weave for 10 years without doing anything. Oh, perhaps that's a little strong. They've done a lot of things that create the illusion that they care, but they haven't done a single meaningful thing to demonstrate that they care. H2 Ohio, wonderful notion, but it is most valuable in creating the political illusion that Columbus cares about us, because all of it is based on the notion of voluntary compliance. We talk about the carrot and the stick. Well, the EPA's approach, the state, to some extent the federal government's approach has been all carrot. Here, if you behave the way we'd like you to, we'll give you a carrot. That works to a point, but at some point there has to be a stick. When your children, you're trying to teach your kids, to do their errands, to clean their room, to do the dishes, you could politely suggest that they do it, or there could be a sanction if they don't. This isn't rocket science. This is human decision-making. The legislature, the governor, they have never provided anything along the lines of that kind of regulation to the industry that is causing this. And I know I've been long-winded, but I just want to end with two little stories that I think are fitting. Both happened in my early times as mayor. Maybe within the first month, a huge delegation from the state EPA came up and had a big meeting with us in our conference room, and they wanted to hold a news conference celebrating the City of Toledo for achieving one of our regulatory objectives in terms of the amount of pollution we provide through our water plant, our Bayview wastewater treatment plant, et cetera. We, of course, are regulated to within an inch of our lives, making sure that what we contribute into the waterways isn't harmful. And though I can't remember what it was, we had just toggled above some level, and we were now in compliance. And so the EPA wanted to pat us on the back and had a news conference, and I said, no, I don't want to celebrate that, because it will create the illusion that the problem is being caused by wastewater treatment plants, when in reality it's being caused elsewhere. That surprised them, but the fact is that the algal bloom problem that we suffer from is caused to some extent by wastewater treatment plants of the kind that Toledo and Cleveland have. It's somewhere between 4.5% and 5.5%. I'm not making that number up. Mike DeWine and his EPA directors cite that because it comes from the academic study that has resolved the facts of this long ago. We weren't going to allow them to use us as a pawn in pretending that making a de minimis improvement on an institution that contributes 5% of the problem means anything at all, when they actively do nothing to regulate the 95% of folks in the state who do cause the problem. And the second story happened shortly thereafter. A high-ranking EPA official came to meet with me in my office. I won't reveal her name, but she may have been the director. We were having a conversation, and we're talking about different realities, and I kept pressing and pressing and pressing, and her back was to the door in my office, and the office door was open. It was just the two of us, and as I kept pressing, she actually sort of looked over her shoulder to make sure no one was coming in the room and says, "You know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like a regulation." And I said, "Yes, it does, because this is the only thing that will solve this problem." But and of course they haven't done that. Why would they? Why would they do anything to harm their political allies, when in reality, urban dwellers are less likely to be their political allies, and they know it, which is why they lard costs and regulations on us, those who don't form a political base that they care about, and they do literally nothing to harm their political base, even though their political base is causing 95% of the problem. It's actually a great racket if they could get away with it, and they've gotten away with it for 10 years. We hope that with this lawsuit, those days come to an end, and we can rally together, embrace facts, and actually, instead of caring about what's important to the big campaign donors, that our elected officials start caring about what's right for the citizens. So, City of Toledo is happy to be here. Is it my role to turn it over to Fritz? Okay, and now we're going to hear from the legal eagle of all of this, the Louis Brandeis of our effort, Fritz Byers.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. The strength and leadership you see of the city administration and the Board of County Commissioners is a reflection of the character and grit of the people who live in Lucas County along the western basin of Lake Erie. We are good citizens. We pull together, we think of the common good, and we put our shoulder to the wheel when there's something to be accomplished. But what we do not do is tolerate it when other governments break their promises to us, and hence this lawsuit. The promise of the Clean Water Act is that working together, the state and federal governments would preserve the health and long-term ecological soundness of our precious natural resources, both water and air. And in that regard, we have been failed repeatedly and abjectly, both by our state and our federal governmental officials. We were acutely disappointed at the facial inadequacy of the TMDL that the state of Ohio's EPA produced. But we believed at the time that the U.S. EPA would do the job that it is assigned under the Clean Water Act to do. And when we gathered together in Government Center, the building that we're in today, city officials and county officials, to talk remotely on a Zoom call with the leadership of Region 5 of the U.S. EPA, we said to them what we know to be true. If you were to look out of your tall glass building in downtown Chicago and look out over Lake Michigan and see that lake blighted by algal blooms the way our lake is blighted, there is not a chance in the world that you would tolerate it, that you would accept local and state governments' apathy so that those degrading conditions continue to blight our precious interstate and international waterways. And we were right about that. We also invited them not to take our word for it, and don't believe the pictures or the video images you've seen. Why don't you come and let us take you out to the western basin of Lake Erie so you can see for yourselves what a dismaying picture that lake presents to us. They rejected that invitation. They didn't have the time. We renewed it. They didn't have the time. And then we got a cursory flick of the wrist saying that it is not for the U.S. EPA to second-guess the judgments of the state EPA about whether voluntary measures that have failed for 2 decades will miraculously, all of a sudden, fix the environmental problems. You have seen from our elected leaders here, we will not go away. We should be proud here. We are the only locality in the history of Clean Water Act litigation to have to go to court not once, not twice, 4 times in an effort to force the federal government to come into our community and do what 50 years ago the United States Congress said you must do, which is serve the people and preserve their resources. It's a cliche these days to say that government is broken, that on any particular issue of public debate, the body politic is split in half, so there is no consensus. That may be true for many issues, but it's not true about this issue. There is no constituency that favors air pollution. There is no constituency that favors water pollution. What there is a vested interest in large industrial farming operations that, as Commissioner Gerken said, successfully feed us, but at the same time they churn out unprecedented levels of waste that are undermining and threatening to destroy the health of our community, the health of our people, and the possibility of a robust and thriving future. That is why, under the leadership of the people here assembled today, this community is saying yet again, we will not tolerate this. We are not naive. We know it's a big battle, but we trust in the decency of our people, and we trust in the integrity of the legal system to finally declare what we have known for 50 years. The law does not tolerate this kind of pollution, and it does not tolerate it when state officials do not do their duty to protect us. And we are confident that when all the facts come out, we will succeed in convincing whatever judges pay attention to this that the U.S. EPA has acted contrary to law, and that we should finally have an order directly from the judiciary that the U.S. EPA finally do its job on our behalf. Thank you.